Hey, happy birthday and welcome back to Edgier Than Thou. I am so sorry that nobody has said that to you yet today. But hey, as my gift to you, you get to listen to several minutes of me talking about a show I like. Many of you folks likely know Robert Kirkman's Invincible on Amazon Prime as the thing that kind of made the pee bottles a little bit worth it. But even though the comics began coming out decades earlier, I would hazard a guess that most of you probably haven't looked at them. Before you ask, yes, I have read all of them, including that one random issue of Invincible Returns that just gets kind of like inserted into the middle there. No idea what that's about, not gonna look it up. But it's a popular mantra among novel readers and comic readers alike that the book is always better. And I'm here to tell you, in the case of Invincible, at least with what we have so far, it's just not true. The show is so much better. Full disclosure, this video will contain spoilers for everything from up to Volume 3, I believe issue 12 of the series, and of course, the entire first season. Normally when I'm talking about spoilers for a TV show or for a comic series, I would say that Season 1 or the first 13 issues is not all that big of a deal, but when it comes to Invincible, I do think that it's important that you have consumed at least one of these. If you've seen the first season of the show and haven't read the comics, this will be fine for you. You're not going to have a bunch ruined for you. And vice versa if you've read the comics but not seen the show. Although, if that is you, I would be very interested to hear why you haven't seen it yet. But with that, let's get into it. Let's talk about why the Omni-Man fight at the end of Season 1 of Invincible is miles better than the comic version of that battle. This video is going to assume that you know the context behind this fight because I really want you to just watch the show. Don't watch this video without having seen the show. It just hit me that I missed the really obvious title card drop for this video. So, to narrate this video essay, Malachi would have to be... I should probably make it clear exactly what it is that I'm trying to argue here. This isn't going to be a video about how the action in the show is better than the action in the comic. Surprise, in 15 years and a much higher budget, they managed to make a more exciting fight scene. That's not super interesting. What I'm more concerned about is how this fight is written. What are these characters' motivations, and how are they expressing them? The good news is, Nolan and Mark's motivations are not significantly different between the comics and the show. As the tension and the emotion in this scene builds, it becomes clear that Mark has three primary motivations. One, to convince his father to change his mind, to stop this madness. Two, if that fails, to stop his father. I don't think Mark really knows exactly what that looks like, what he would actually do to stop him. Does he kill him? Does he simply incapacitate him? I don't think Mark has thought that far ahead. And three, while this is made significantly more clear in the show, Mark wants to save people. He wants to protect the people of this planet. That's why he's fighting his father in the first place. While this is expressed fine in the comics, we'll talk about how this could have been retooled a little bit, but what I'm more interested in are Omni-Man's motivations. Now, what does he want in this scene? It's important for us to realize that Omni-Man doesn't need to draw this fight out. He makes several displays of power in this battle that make it incredibly clear that if he wanted to, he could end Mark in just a moment. No. The fact that Nolan is having this fight at all is evidence that he cares about his son on some level. From his twisted Viltrumite perspective, this is the best way to convince Mark that the Viltrumite cause is an admirable one. Omni-Man wants Mark voluntarily at his side. In essence, Omni-Man really only has one motivation in this scene, and that's to convince Mark that the subjugation of humans is just, that ultimately Viltrumites are worth more on some philosophical level. Both versions of the brawl are very dialogue heavy as both actors attempt to convince each other that their perspective is the correct one. Inevitably, the conversation turns to Mark's mother, Nolan's wife, Debbie Grayson, a human person who Nolan has ostensibly loved for decades. In the animated version of the fight, we get to hear Nolan attempt to reframe Mark's perspective by saying, while he does love Mark's mother, he doesn't view her species as equal.
I do love your mother, but she's more like a pet to me.
Upon first watch, this line is genuinely devastating. It's haunting to hear this man talk about someone that he was supposed to love in such a callous way. But underneath all of it, you hear him still express that he did love this woman, that she did matter to him, just not in the way that Mark expected her to. Not in the way that two humans would love each other. It's painful, it's twisted, it's disgusting, it's wrong, but you still believe that a centuries-old alien with some form of a superiority complex would believe that about himself. Let's see how the comic handles this interaction. Full disclosure, I am aware that I'm not going to be able to give a convincing voice performance in the same manner as J.K. Simmons and Steven Yeun in this scene. As such, I'm not even going to try. Do you have any idea what our lifespan is? The older we get, the slower we age. We can't live among these frail things. Your mother is little more than a pet. Little more than a pet. This feels different, right? Rather than attempt to convince Mark that he genuinely does love Debbie, just in a different way than he should, Nolan instead argues that Debbie wasn't important to begin with. She was little more than a pet. While in the show, Nolan recognizes that the person Mark loves most in the world is his mother and attempts to speak to him through that love, in the comic, he seems to not even be aware that she would be so important to him. Indeed, in a later panel, when Mark says, "How can you say these things? How can you say that about Mom? You love her. I've seen it," Nolan replies with, "Your mother means nothing to me." With dialogue like this, it is hard for me to believe that Nolan in any way cares about convincing his son to his cause. He should know that there's no way this is going to convince Mark in a fucking million years. Of course, the show does have this moment. It has the "your mother means nothing to me" moment, but it frames it significantly better.
Is Mom's life worthless?
In the grand scheme of things, yes.
In this scene, we see Nolan trying to communicate to his son what he believes to be a hard truth. Rather than trying to claim that Debbie's life is worthless to him, he reframes the discussion to be about some hard truth of the universe. I can 100% believe that a father trying to change his son's mind would say this. That he would clearly avoid the most horrible thing he could say in this moment, and instead try to convince Mark that there's just more at play here. He's still wrong, but his dialogue is 100% in line with his motivation. So much better than, "Your mother means nothing to me, Mark." Before talking about the dialogue a bit more, let's talk about these fights' use of violence. Both versions of the battle make use of gratuitous collateral damage, but in the show, that violence is the point, whereas in the comics it seems more just like a backdrop, almost like any old superhero fight taking place in a city. In the show, Omni-Man uses mass murder as some kind of demented teaching tool. He kills hundreds to thousands of people to make two major points. One, that Viltrumite lives are so much more valuable and important than human lives that a single snap of a Viltrumite's finger can end the lives of hundreds of humans, and thus, on a cosmic scale, humans are just less important. And two, that he's going to continue killing people until Mark surrenders, that if Mark cares so much about human lives, he'll stop trying to resist. In doing so, he presents a genuine moral dilemma for Mark. If Mark wants to save people in the short run, the best thing for him to do is to give in and let his father win this fight. The Viltrumite Empire will show up, hopefully Earth won't resist, and everyone will be, quote-unquote, happy. Of course, Mark sees through this facade, but once again, it is believable that if Omni-Man wants to convince his son to change sides, this is how he would do it. It's made clear that Viltrumites solve their problems through violence, and that Nolan thinks that the best way to convince his son is to beat the humanity out of him. This element is largely absent from the comics. Like I said before, it's really just a backdrop. Sure, you could read this meaning into the text, but at no point is it made clear that this is why Omni-Man is doing what he's doing. Once again, in the show, all of Nolan's actions are consistent with his character and his motivations, while in the comic, he just kind of seems like he's being a dick to be a dick. Throughout most of this tussle so far, Omni-Man has been behaving rationally with respect to his worldview. Every decision he's made has been calculated with the goal of convincing his son in mind. At some point, he begins to let his emotions get the better of him. You see this as his tone switches from edgy Reddit atheist just telling it like it is to anger and disgust at the mere thought of siding with Mark. It is at this point that he lets his rage get the better of him and he says this.
You want to die for this planet? Fine! What's 17 more years? I can always start again. Make another kid. Once
again, he delivers a line that's agonizing. It's brutal. But at this point, you can tell that he doesn't mean it. He wouldn't be having this fight if he meant it. Now, instead of trying to convince Mark not to care, he's trying to convince himself. It's cold, it's vile, but at the heart of it, you see his pain. Contrast that to the line in the comics. I'm tired of this game. If you choose to stand against me, you can die with them. I can always produce more offspring. This version of the line feels so cold in all the wrong ways. He's using language that would suggest that he's still being calculating, that he still is choosing every word deliberately with the goal of convincing his son. And yet what he said is just, it's so pointlessly cruel. He's telling Mark that he doesn't matter to him, that he's not even a son, he's just offspring. And I have to ask, in what world does this line make sense? It's obviously not going to convince Mark. He definitely knows that, but is he really trying to convince himself by matter-of-factly stating that technically Mark is offspring? Hello, Mark Grayson. I would like to inform you that I am biologically capable of producing more children. What's the point? The pieces are all here, I feel, but but they're not put together in a way that feels convincing, that feels like there's an arc taking place over the course of this battle. Both versions of the fight ultimately end with what I would argue is the most impactful line in this entire scene, after Omni-Man says,
"What will you have after 500 years?"
Mark replies with the heartbreaking,
"You, Dad. I still have you."
And in both versions, we can see how this would cause Omni-Man's heart to just kind of shatter. That through all of this violence, all of this murder, Mark finds it within himself to remind his father that he still loves him. And in both versions, it's just as painful as you can imagine, as Omni-Man realizes he cannot bring himself to kill his son in cold blood like he believed he was able to. He flies off into space, abandoning his post and ultimately betraying his people. In both versions, this is brutal, yes, but it's so much more earned in the show version because you really see the relationship between these two characters play out during the fight. Even while beating the ever-loving shit out of his son, you still see Nolan expressing his twisted version of love.
Everyone you know and love will be gone before you even look 30. It's not something I want for you.
While in the comics version, you see a genocidal tyrant taken aback by one admittedly depressing line, in the show, you get to see a father ashamed of his actions, horrified by what he was about to do to his son. Because of this, when I watch the show, this line kills me every time. It's aided by a genuinely beautiful flashback sequence that could almost be its own short film.
Did you see that? Did you see? Oh, that was amazing!
Yeah, I saw.
I might be being a little bit dramatic there, I just really love this show. But when I read the comic, I feel, ow, that really hurts. And I mean, that is an emotional reaction. I do feel something. When I watch the show, I feel more. And sure, the vocal performances are fantastic and they absolutely sell this. And my inner monologue when I'm reading comics is variable at best. But even when I read this scene in Steven's and JK's voices, I still am struck by the fact that it's not as strong. It's not as powerful. In this way, I hope that they learn from this. I hope that when season 2 comes out in late 2023, we see all of the impactful moments in the comics that still weren't quite sold amped up to 11. That character arcs which felt kind of rushed get their time to breathe. We get to really see these character interactions play off of each other and see the love that they genuinely feel for each other. In my mind, that's what makes Invincible fantastic. Unlike The Boys, which is kind of a similar premise superhero show that's really all about the social commentary and kind of places the characters as a close second, Invincible is about relationships. It's about love. It dips into social commentary here and there. It touches on politics, and that's all well and good. But ultimately, in my eyes, Invincible is about love. And the show just sells that better. I'm realizing now that I said I was going to touch on Mark's motivations in this scene, and really, the more time I spend thinking about it, the stuff that I had planned to talk about that feels less significant. But ultimately, I just wanted to mention that in the show, Mark's desire to save people and prevent collateral damage is so interwoven with everything else that he does that you genuinely believe that that is the #1 thing on his mind. Up until the very end, that is the thing that matters to him the most. And as a result, the moments where he says,
"This is my life! These are my people!"
just kind of hit harder because you know he really believes it. In the comic, there just isn't that much focus on Mark preventing collateral damage, and as a result, when he says those things, it's impactful. It's clear that he believes them, but you don't believe them. In essence, I guess the comic just kind of tells rather than shows, whereas the show weaves the two together. But anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun just kind of talking about this. I love this show. I will probably talk about it more in the future, even though that little trailer bit that was released today, although probably yesterday by the time this video comes out, it was a little bit underwhelming. I'm so genuinely excited for the direction that this is going to go. I think that it's going to be harder to adapt this next section of the comics because I kind of think that the story is a little bit weaker. I do think it has the potential to be just as good, if not better than season 1, and I am so unbelievably hyped to see that happen. I have complete and total faith in the writers. As far as I can tell, every important concept from the comics that was adapted to the screen, they just improved upon. And yes, I am including Amber when I say that. Amber is better in the show than she is in the comics, and you can fight me on that. But with that, if you enjoyed this, please feel free to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, follow me on Instagram at edgierthanthou, follow me on Twitter at edgierthan, and I hope to see you in the next one where I probably won't be talking about Invincible again yet, but I will talk about it again in the future.